I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
If you recall your history, somewhere around 1880 to 1920, the world led by the United States went into what's called the Industrial Revolution. Essentially, it meant that the small ma and pa family-owned businesses were transformed into large organizations where we went from maybe 4 or 5 people working at a company to maybe 4,000 or 5,000. This was brought on by large manufacturing industries that just sprung up. Think about the original Ford plant that was kicking out cars every day. Well, once that started, we had to start figuring out how do we manage work and how do we manage business and the flow of people. The person who really began that whole movement was a guy named Frederick Winslow Taylor. Ever since then, we've had this fascination, meaning hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books and seminars and speakers and TED Talks, all on the topic of how do we structure our business and how do we manage our people. You've heard things like total quality management, lean process improvement, Six Sigma, and now today we hear a lot about what's called agility or agile. My next guest is an agile or agility expert, and she's going to teach us and tell us what it is, what it's not, how do we get started, and how do we create the right behaviors that allow the structure of agility to really flourish. Her name is Angela Johnson. Angela is a certified Scrum Trainer and a business agility coach with CoLeadTeam. In 2010, she founded the company to provide education and coaching services to clients adopting Scrum and Agile. In 2014, Angela renamed the company and began assembling the Dream Team. CoLeadTeam uses the Agile values and principles it teaches. Their experiences to help their clients apply these practices more readily and enable them to pivot in the face of change is really what made them so successful. She is a graduate of Hamline University and the University of St. Thomas, which happens to be in my own hometown of Minneapolis and St. Paul, back in Minnesota. And Angela focuses her work on the upper Midwest area of the United States. Angela Johnson on the Business of Intuition. Well, Angela, it's great having you on the show. Thanks for being here. You fellow Minneapolitan, you Minnesota. I'm sorry the Vikings didn't make it. Oh, God, I'm so upset. What the heck?
Too soon.
It started getting to the point where I started building hope again. And there was like the old Fran Tarkenton days. I'm dating myself. And then, of course, bang, it all fell out from my doors. Anyway, we're not here to talk.
It's the hope that kills you.
It's the hope that kills you. We're not here to talk about sports. And I know you live on, a wonderful lake near my old hometown. So we'll get off on that topic. But let's talk about what you're really here to talk about, which is agility. And yes. I want to, first of all, sort of set the stage for our listeners in that business structure has a lot to do with the business's success. That sometimes when you run into an issue with a strategy or behavior or what have you, you have to map it back to, well, how is this company or team structured? Because that's going to have a direct effect on their ultimate outcomes. It's not the only thing, but it's certainly a big part of it. Could you please sort of explain what agility is from a structure perspective?
Absolutely. If you Google agility, a lot of dog training businesses will come up. So it's like when we say agility,
I don't understand.
I don't know either. But it's like dog trainers use that word. But it's about being nimble, adapt, pivot, turn on a dime for a dime. So when you talk about structure, the more hierarchy and the more red tape we have, the less nimble, the less flexible we are. So this is really less about structure and more about empowering teams of people to be accountable and to be self-managing so that in the face of an impediment or in the face of change, they can turn on a dime for a dime. So your business isn't held hostage by whatever that issue is, right? Well, I've got to go check with so-and-so, and then so-and-so has to check with so-and-so, and then all this time goes by, and we may have missed an opportunity. We may have ticked a customer off, and we can't get them back. So flatter is better, but the key part of that isn't, because that scares some people. It's like, oh, we'll manage your people for food. I don't want anybody to think they're out of a job, but it's about thinking and working differently, empowering teams of people.
So I remember hearing one of the, what was the grocery store chains, Whole Foods, I think was at one point.
Yes.
You know the story, your head's going back and forth. But didn't that thing, in a sense, say, you are in a team or in a pod, and you decide who comes into your team. You hire and fire.
Correct.
We have a bonus. Everyone gets, there's 20% of revenue that we're going to give to everybody. Each pod or team decides how they want to divvy it up within each particular area. Do I have that story correct?
Yes. And I'll fill in a few blanks with the story. Some of those folks come to my public workshops, which is why I get to hear some of these anecdotal, stories from them right from the horse's mouth. And sometimes people talk about scaling Agile, making it bigger. And it's like, hold on. When you scale a fish, you don't make it bigger. You take things away. So, people wanted to come in with this big scaling Agile. And the employees at Whole Foods said, no, we like our small, nimble teams. Don't you dare ruin that with this big, crazy structure.
How would the small, nimble teams, how would you scale that using the Whole Foods story?
When we talk about scaling to organizations, we talk about flattening and empowering those small empowered teams to use this really, really, really advanced technique called talking to each other. They're going to talk to each other.
Talking to each other?
Talking to each other.
Oh, talking to each other? I thought you said something else. Sorry.
Actually going to communicate with each other directly and get stuff done. And I know it's like way too much for some people to wrap their head around that.
I'm still, so all this makes sense, Angela, but what's the scaly part that you said then you lose some magic, secret sauce in all this? I don't understand how that couldn't be scaled.
Yeah, because there's people who are trading on the name Agile, right? It's hot, it's, it sells. And so there's these people selling, a scaled Agile, one size fits all, just follow these 3 steps, right? But it's this big hierarchical picture, and there's nothing Agile about that. There's nothing nimble about that. So the people at Whole Foods were like, no, we are not going to do that because it's going to wreck the secret sauce. It's going to wreck the success that we're experiencing.
All right, let me get another example without naming names and so forth. But we've got an organization that is going certainly through that particular interest to be able to create a much more agile structure. And it's complicated. There's a lot of different projects. There's a lot of different decisions, and there's cross-pollination. It's not a straight line, I only have this person to work with. I have many masters, if you will, many people in which to serve. How does agility work in a complex system like that?
Very well, because it pays off when the system is complicated or complex. The one thing that organizations have to understand is it means change. It means change, because the old definition of insanity. If we're just going to keep doing the old thing over and over, then you're not going to get a different result. So most organizations suffer from some kind of shiny object syndrome. Oh, it's all priority. Come on. It can't all be priority. Priority literally means something is prior to something else. And so we have to order the work. And if you get all your people focused on what the highest priority goal or objective is, you actually start getting done. But when you time slice people, when you say, oh, you're working on these 4 or 5 initiatives all at the same time, they experience a loss to their productivity because of context switching. Because every time they, go ahead.
No, who then creates the highest priority?
That's where you do need somebody setting the goals and objectives. Different Agile approaches will call that person something else. Scrum calls it product owner, but honestly, whoever the person is that's best able to discern through all the different things and say, this is 1, this is 2, right? This is going to make us the most money. This is going to save us the most pain, whatever that is. They have to have that ordered list.
So you just brought in another term. So I just want to make sure that we explain the definitions of these different words. You've talked about agility. Now you've talked about Scrum. What is that? So people understand it.
Sure.
And not to assume that everyone understands what that means. And then also, how is it different than agility? How is it the same?
Yeah. Agility or agile is kind of an umbrella term. There's all these different frameworks that help you be agile. So Scrum is one of them, but there are other choices on the menu. There's like an extreme programming, feature-driven development. Scrum is the popular one because Scrum is short for scrummage, rugby-like huddle, people working together. That's the popular one. So it does give that minimal prescription. Like you said, who gives the direction? Scrum actually has a named role called product owner, an accountability, to say, here's what you're going to work on first. Mm-hmm.
So if you were, I could see where a small company where everybody knows each other, everybody knows their name. Doesn't that sound like a popular soap or a 1990s sitcom? So if everybody knows your name and everybody understands kind of what's going on, smaller company, I could see this would, in my opinion, be an easier lift, if you will. But
you are correct.
An organization of 500 or 600 or maybe 7,000 or 8,000 people, can a team create an agile work environment when the overall system does not?
They can to a point. And so when people ask me from my own personal successes, what's in common about the companies that I would call a success, small, and I would call that 6,000 people or less, privately
6,000 people or less is considered a small company.
Yeah, we have a credit union that's 6,000 people, and they were able to be adaptive and nimble just fine, but they had buy-in from their leaders to empower people and to make these changes. Above 6,000, that ship takes longer to turn. That gets you more red tape. Maybe if it's publicly traded, there's things that the leaders have to worry about, like the board or shareholders. And so under the constraints of that structure, tying it back to what you brought up about structure, a team may only get to go so far, because if they hit organizational impediments, whether that's a policy that's out of alignment with agility, then there they are. But the methods under this agile umbrella expose those things very, very quickly. And then it's up to the leaders to say, do I want to change this? Do I not want to change this?
So it's almost, in some ways, it's all or nothing kind of like. I'm sort of hearing this. It's easier if we're all in versus half of us are not.
It is easier if we're all in. Then people will say, well, should I bother? I always say yes, because what's the worst that could happen? If you do use some of the practices in these various frameworks, you do get increased transparency. What business wouldn't want to know what's going on sooner rather than later? And I don't even care if it's bad news. I want to know about the bad news before I've wasted too much time and money. Happy news, of course, right? But I want that transparency so that I can make better decisions as a small business owner.
So I want to get to something very tactical here in a minute, but before I do that, you just said something about hearing the bad news. I want to hear that. Yes, we all would say, and on our guest, I want that. But there are so many, the biggest issue in a lot of organizations is not their structure, it's the interpersonal connections that people have with one another. I don't trust you. We join organizations, we leave managers, there's bad blood. The pandemic has gotten us sloppy with being able to have personal communications with each other. So it's even more conflict averse than it was before. This sort of transparency, although it sounds wonderful, when it gets to the actual risk that one has to take in order to give feedback, provide it, and receive it, that's a whole nother thing. How do you address the interpersonal issues that get called out or are required for an agile work environment?
There's a couple of different ways. When I coach leaders on making this change, I always ask, are you ready for it? Well, what do you mean? I'm like, you are the leader. You have to set the tone. So if you're going to make this change, the people making this change deserve to know expectations, because what looks like resistance or people problems can just be that they're confused, right? They don't know what's expected of them. So as the leader, you got to shape the path. You got to give them very clear direction about what's expected of them. Then depending on the Agile approach, in Scrum, there's this coaching role called Scrum Master, but it's really a coach. That's what it is. Some of the other approaches have a similar role. That person really has to help enable the teamwork, help escalate those issues, because I do see a lot of what you're saying, and I will flat out ask people directly, we've been asked to make this change. So tell me if you don't know how to make the change, or I want to know if you just don't want to. And if somebody says, I don't want to, I always thank them for their honesty. Thank you for your honesty. But now I have to escalate this to, fill in the blank, whoever's asked us to work this way. And then leaders really have to decide, is the I don't want to behavior acceptable? Is it not acceptable? Because I hear people say, oh, we're having trouble hiring. But then I hear all these talented, amazing people say, I'm looking. So it's like, it is an interesting time post-pandemic here with all that stuff.
So would you have some sort of an assessment that sort of indicates whether or not an organization is ready for this kind of change? And if they aren't, a prognosis of how they can ready themselves for it?
Absolutely. Our team does that all the time. When people ask us to do assessments, we always just say, well, there's way more to just assessing. And exactly what you said. Do you want a readiness assessment? Or have you already started and you're like, this isn't going very well? And you want some sort of scorecard to say why? Like, is it a people problem? Is it a structure problem? Is it a education problem? What kind of problem is it here?
Okay, so I'm listening in, and I am a person who works in a smaller organization, maybe even smaller than, say, 6,000. And I want to know,
like 10?
Like us, right? Yeah. Well, let's just say that I'm interested, and I want to kind of know what the next steps are, and I want to also ask the same question for something that's larger. What would I do? What's the sequence of things that need to happen in order to bring agility, Scrum, what have you, into my organization if it is small? What's the first, second, third, fourth thing to do?
Absolutely. So the first thing is, if they're going to make any kind of change, get people together and be very transparent with them about, here's why. Because if they don't say why, people are like, well, okay, another change fad, right? Another flavor of the day kind of thing. So what is the driver? Is it that we aren't getting to market fast enough? Is it that we're losing to the competition? Is it that we have some sort of defect or unhappy customers? What's the problem you're trying to solve here? Why?
Yes.
Why? And then from there, we can talk about, what does that mean to everybody? So here's the goal and objective with doing this. We're going to give you an ordered list instead of piling on your plate or whatever it is. And then we have to talk about how we're going to do it. You also brought up the who. So here's what it means to you in your role. Here's what it means to you in your role. Here's what it means to you. Because otherwise the ego will make up what it doesn't know. So leaders have to make sure that they're telling all this to people in order to get buy-in and to start making this change.
So in a sense, if I could just interrupt you, the beginning stage really is change management.
It is. It all
changing
is.
Mindset. It's education. What is the issues we're dealing with? What problems are we trying to solve? Why would Agile or Scrum or whatever your particular framework would be, why is that going to solve our particular problem or make us more profitable or fill in the blank? And then how does that then relate to me as an individual, a manager, leader, what have you? And what does that look like? So giving it more practicality. What other steps need to happen? Once we sort of get the change management piece figured out, how do we implement something like this?
Start. Because it's all about start, right? Because it's all about experimentation. So it's like, let's try something. Oh, that made it worse. Good information. Let's try something else. Or, okay, let's start. Hey, that's actually helping us get things done better. Cool. What do we do more of? So it's all about this inspection and adaptation once we have data, which is it's the human condition, right?
Yeah.
Learning to walk and talk is an experiment. So a lot of people will say, this feels like a lot of common sense. Yeah, it's the way we're wired. We love to try things.
Well, this sort of I'm thinking about certain industries where experimentation is possible and even encouraged. That's where learning can take place. Fail forward, as we might say.
Yeah.
And even in slivers within organizations, we might have the ability to experiment. But the industry itself may not require it. For example, say we're a hospital and we've got people's lives on the line, and we have procedures that are dealing with, centimeters of making incisions, and there are board certified processes that we have to follow. Otherwise, we lose our certifications and so forth. We break some major medical ethics if we don't do it exactly this way, right? Yeah, we might also have some other part of that particular organization, which is maybe we think about it from the lean process. Like, how do we then get the supplies to the physician quickly? How do we go from one part of the hospital to another without backstepping our process? Like a restaurant, how do we then go and grab the food from the kitchen, come back and deliver it, but at the same time, we go back to the kitchen without bringing something with us? Like, how do we make all of that? That can be an experimental process.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to certain other parts of the business, no, we can't put in lean. We have to do it this way because government agencies, people's lives on the line, and what have you. What are your thoughts on that?
This is all rooted in lean. I don't know if you knew that. Agile.
I figured it was, yeah.
Yeah. And Scrum is just what Toyota did. It's just codified, right? Just has a cute little framework around it. Well,
Which all goes back to total quality management if you go way back. Yeah.
Yeah. We quote Edwards Deming a lot.
Yes, we do.
in our Scrum and Agile workshops. Well, you and I have a mutual client in healthcare, so it's kind of fun to work with them because you talk about a physician. The wonderful thing about our mutual client is that you'll see a team of physicians. And my husband is a patient at that organization, and he has a pretty severe eye condition. And one of the things is, he went down there because he's at he needs the top of the food chain for the physicians when it comes to his eye. He doesn't just have one person who specializes in the front of the eye. No, he has a team. There was 5 in one meeting with him, and they were all collaborating with each other as they're testing him to see, well, what is really the problem? Is it the back of the eye? Is it the front of the eye? Is it astigmatism? What is it, right? So think about that. This whole team of experts working in a rugby-like approach, sharing information for the good of the patient. So there are constraints. Anytime you have healthcare, there's HIPAA, there's ICD-10, all that happy stuff. So most of these methods don't negate that. They start with that. They're like, here's the quality standard that is non-negotiable. And now we've got to make sure that we're preventing defects or deviations from that. But we start with knowing what it is as opposed to waiting till the end of a long life cycle to check if we made it. We can't afford to wait till then.
So in some ways, you describe this and I get re-energized by this conversation, that a lot of things we would just say is good business practice.
Right? That's what I say. It's a lot of common sense.
it's talking to people. It's giving each other feedback. It's collaboration. It's respect. It's a lot of value statements that could be circling the wagon around this conversation. We'd all say, wait a minute, we don't have to call this whatever you want to call it. We're trying to do this anyway. And I get it from that perspective that these are behaviors that we would all subscribe to. We're just maybe saying this is agile, this is lean, this is what have you, right? It's another term for it. So that makes sense to me. I do want to ask you another question though about the structure piece, going back to where we started, where we were discussing this idea around Whole Foods.
Yeah.
That in a sense, you're pushing the decisions down beyond the C-suite.
Correct.
Where it's getting to where the work actually happens. And that's a business practice we've been hearing a lot about. We talk about change management. We talk about certain things. There are certain top-down things that the executives should be doing, major restructuring, financial concerns, and so forth. But when it comes to culture change, process improvement, policies, and so forth, that's often from the ground up because that's where the work is done, right?
Right. And go to Gemba.
Yep, exactly. Top management doesn't see it because they're not in the trenches every day. So all that makes sense. But how do we then structure? I think it has to do with decision making. Like I can't do this because my boss's boss won't support it. How do we then change the structure of decision making to bring it down to a more localized level? Because that to me feels like some fairly substantial change and effort to be made in order to make that happen.
It totally. And one of the things that people need to realize is if you're going to empower somebody, ideally you're saying to them, I trust you. I trust you for the good of the organization, not to do something that's going to hurt the company or that's going to hurt the customers. And what's playing in my head right now is somebody who is never going to get this. So maybe a client I'm no longer going to work with. But as I was talking with them, they said, well, of course I don't trust them. And I said, why do they work here? Now we have a different conversation to have. Why do they work here? Come on. So if you trust people and, sometimes as human beings, we like boundaries. So it's a good thing as a leader to say, here's the guardrails, right? Here's the most you can spend, or here's the most, leeway you have. Above that or beyond that, I want you to talk to me. I want you to ask me for my input. And as somebody who does own a small business, I trust my team implicitly. And it blows a lot of people's minds. People want to come to me for stuff. And I'm like, what are you coming to me for? I just work here. I empower that team completely because I don't want to get bogged down in all those things. They're all empowered. They know where the guardrail is for spend, but I don't even do titles because I want them all to have the flexibility. If a title means something to the person they're interacting with, I want them all empowered to say, well, I am the manager or I am the director to, get them past the gatekeeper or what have you.
So the pandemic hit. We all had to work from home for a while. Many of us still are, at least a few days of the week. There's some statistics that say that's going to continue. We're going to see more people working from home or virtually, and that it might even be more than what we would find people coming to quote unquote work to work. Did we, in a sense, by virtue of the fact that we're now working virtually and that we as managers are having to trust that our teams people are doing their work, meaning not just simply feeding the dogs and going to the refrigerator all the time, but they're getting work done. Did we, in a sense, as a society, move more towards an agile work paradigm because of the fact that we're now spending so much more time on Zoom?
I believe we are, but I also believe there may be some of your listeners or some business owners who are going, they had trust issues with those employees anyway. All the pandemic did was reveal it. Because when you give people the support that they need in the environment and trust them, more work gets done. They're not losing time with commute in the suit and all those kinds of things, right? So giving them that flexibility. And so we've proven we can do it. Now it's just a wake-up call to some of these businesses to say, are you going to get on board with this? Or, what's going to happen? Because you could conceivably get more done, especially if you're allowing people to live in multiple time zones, kind of that work around the clock, so to speak. You know what I mean? If depending on where people are, kind of keeping work flowing through that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely something that a lot of kind of old school, I need to see you because I need to look over your shoulder. I need to see that you're productive. Those kinds of people are freaking out because I do work with some of those leaders.
No doubt about it. I mean, micromanagement is on its heyday in some organizations right now. I guess, so what's your sort of like, you mentioned that before we got started that this particular podcast episode that you wanted to call this was something to do with agile or die?
Business agility. Business agility. Adapt or die.
Adapt or die. So is the agility becoming more important? And if so, why? That if we don't, to your cheeky comment, we could die.
Right? And it wasn't just the pandemic, right? When's the last time you were at a Blockbuster Video? When's the last time you went to a Borders bookstore?
Well, as I told you, I live in Bend, Oregon. We have a house up here, and the last one is about 4 miles from here.
Right.
And it's a museum.
See? Because Netflix even approached Blockbuster, and Blockbuster's like, nah, we're good. So it's like, how's it working for you?
The streaming thing ain't going to happen.
Nah, never going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that internet thing, that's never going to take off.
Yeah.
So the pandemic hit, and let's use me as an example. Our classes were in person. So in fact, we opened our own 8,000 square foot event center here just outside of Minneapolis in 2019.
Congratulations.
Thank you, 2019. And then
Good for you.
you got to be closed. What?
No.
The rent is still due. So our little team pivoted like crazy. So we tricked out these little studios to do classes online. So we repurposed the space. We started licensing the space out to other people, other businesses who let their bricks and mortar go. Because there's always going to be a need to get face to face. There's gonna be times to do that. And so I think that if businesses aren't on board with changing, the market will punish accordingly. They will find out, exactly what's going to happen. Now, some of them have a lot of money, so they may die a slow death. But
Sure.
if they don't adapt in the face of this ever-changing world, they're going to see what's going to happen.
So, I 100% agree with you. I keep referencing this book called How the Mighty Fall by Jim Collins, which is about this idea that if you get too cocky in your success and you don't pay attention to what's going on around you, eventually that could be the reason for your demise. All that makes sense. But is there something about business structure, decision-making, how people work that makes them agile? Simply that I provide you good feedback. I'm willing to listen to your ideas back to me, that we are keeping an eye out for things is one thing. But is there something that is the spine of agility that we need to call out that makes an organization more able to withstand all the external, internal changes?
Absolutely. For me, I would say small, empowered teams. Mission-driven, tactical teams that you can throw commander's intent at them and boom, you trust them to figure it all out. And I'll use my own team as an example again. When we got told, right, that there's a certifying body we work with that had a rule that we could only teach in person. So March 13th, they would revoke our license. They're like, if you teach online, you're done. So March 13th, 2020, the CEO sent this, whole message to all the 250 trainers on the planet and said, oh yeah, figure out how to do your classes online. Good luck. And it's like, what? So my little team rallied around the very first class that was that following week. We did not miss a beat. And we were like using each other as guinea pigs to learn Zoom, learn, all these different online tools. My colleagues are like, I'm going to cancel some classes and wait it out. I'm like, okay, let's see how that works for you. And so a number of people said to me, how did you do that so fast? And I know you loved my Hair Club for Men analogy. And I said, I don't just teach this stuff. I'm also a client.
I'm also a client.
I said, you see, we teach this thing called being agile. So for my team, it wasn't even a choice. It was just the highest priority right now is figuring out how to stay in business despite the circumstances the world has handed all of us. And it just blows some people's minds who lost tons of money, canceled classes or out of business. And they're like, we have no idea how you did that. And it's like, for me, it's common sense. For me, it was a lot of common sense.
Makes a lot of sense. I love it. So let's define this. I love it. Small, empowered teams. What is considered small?
10 people or less is what we typically say. And that's not just an agile rule. That's kind of backed up. Like, I think there was a study out of MIT that talked about smaller, right-sized teams were more productive. I think even the Project Management Institute has published something that says once you get above 10 people, the communication breaks down. Yeah. You get that game of telephone, or you get all those different communication pathways.
Yeah, there's a great book out, call out to the author, John Katzenbach out of Harvard, wrote it about 20 years ago, called The Wisdom of Teams. High-performing teams are small. They're between 7 and 12, I think is what he said. And that number is important because of what you just said. So what is considered empowered? Describe what that means.
Authority to make decisions. Authority that trusted to make decisions. And so when you say empowered, that is important because people may struggle if they don't know where the boundaries are. I think of one of my own team members when we were talking about, well, you're empowered. So she looks right at me, bless her, and she goes, so I can spend $1 million? And I'm like, no. She goes, then where's the guardrail? And I'm like, good point. Feedback. Love it. Here's the guardrail. Up to that amount, I'll make it so you're trusted.
Yeah, I remember with working that we've done over at Exxon, the teams that we were dealing with, the managers would have a certain spend amount, up to that point, they could do it without having to check with anybody else. So what do you consider the definition of a team? The third word in your sentence.
People doing anything together. It's the together. It's the together part. It's the people actually doing something together. And part of that doing something together has to include some kind of norm, social contract. We might call that a working agreement. Do you know what I mean? Like, what does it mean to be on this team? It can get as tactical as how we're going to make decisions. If we have a tie, is it going to be rock, paper, scissors? Is it going to be majority rules? Or it can also be behavioral. Like my own team has a rule. There used to be something that said it's okay to use humor because we all have snarky senses of humor. But there was somebody on our team who would use humor to hurt. He would just drive the knife in and then he'd go, oh, but it's okay to use humor. It's right here in our social contract. We voted him off the island.
Yeah, right.
He was invited not to work here anymore. And then we updated that to say it is okay to use humor as long as you're not doing it to hurt someone. That's not cool.
So let me just say that people doing anything together is really the word that kind of jumps out at me because I think a lot of organizations kind of create teams based on function. We're all accountants, but we don't do anything together because
That's the Taylorism hangover, though. That's the Frederick Winslow Taylor.
Thank you for mentioning my buddy. Yes. So he was for those of you who don't know, check up on your history about the American business management. Frederick Winslow Taylor was the sort of the granddaddy that started all this, 120 years ago?
Yeah, industrial revolution.
Age, right? Mm-hmm. Basically, when we started getting people out of the agrarian, small 4 or 5 person teams or companies, basically PAs, right? So these large manufacturing plants, and how do you structure people? Which is, anyway, so you're right. So the working together means then that we are not a function who happen to all have the same badge that says, I'm the accountant, you're the accountant, we're all accountants.
Right.
But we actually have work that we have to mutually do together in order to create some outcome. And again, going back to Katzenbach's book, he talks a lot about that.
Yeah.
And having a common purpose and a mutually accountable skills and responsibilities that the work gets done because of us working together.
Yeah.
And that's what creates the definition of what a team is. Otherwise, you are simply a work group, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're not a team in the way in which we're talking about. I think that's great.
Right.
I think that's really great.
I think the variation within the team about different strengths is also important because if a team is too homogeneous, like you said, all accountants or all whatever, right? The group think can kind of set in, but there's value in having differing points of view. We're stronger because somebody points out, well, here's all the things that could go wrong. Well, here's all the things that'll make it go right. And you get this stronger outcome because of those differences. And sometimes I think leaders perceive a difference as a challenge to authority or being negative or something. And it's like, no, we got to invite that. That's what makes this team stronger is all of their differences.
Angela, I could continue talking to you for who knows how long. I think this is fascinating, but I'm going to have to sort of put a bow on this. And I know you've got some stuff, and I got some stuff. And I think this is great. You've really been very helpful. How can people find out more about you? What's open for the public consumption? How do we connect with you? Give us your 30-second elevator speech.
CollaborativeLeadershipTeam.com is where you can find our upcoming workshops. If you want to follow me on social media, I do still stay on Twitter. I'm at Agile Angela, of course.
You're sounding a little hesitant about that.
Well, there's some
issues going on there.
There's some people hating on the Twitter right now, but Agile Angela, right? I'm still there. And then on LinkedIn, I'm Angela Johnson, Scrum Trainer.
Angela, it's been great to talk with you.
Likewise, and we'll have to keep in touch. I look forward to the progress in your book, and if I can help in any way from my pain,
Yes,
you just let me know.
Absolutely. And of course, when the weather gets warm, I expect you out on your sailboat.
Absolutely.
Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, Dean. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.